Hey guys, Jeffrey from Headstrong Training Systems here. So today we're going to be taking a look at the deadlift and we're going to be analysing 3 scenarios which we can use to assess whether the occurrence of torso rounding in the deadlift is an issue or not that we should be worrying about or that we should be immediately wanting to make changes to. So the 3 instances that we're going to delve into today is firstly we're going to look at whether it's T-spine rounding or L-spine rounding, so the location of that round in the torso, because that can play a role in helping us decide whether we need to make changes to the rounding. And the second instance is we're going to be assessing whether the timing of that rounding, so whether it occurs during the lift, mid-lift or pre-lift, so because that can also impact the amount of concern we have. And finally, we're also going to talk about the lifter's characteristics, training age, history, etc., because that can finally also play a role in how we proceed. So firstly, when we talk about the location of that rounding, I'm talking about in our back, whether it's down, whether that rounding occurs as a result of our upper back rounding. So you see that in this position, this is my upper back rounded, so whether it's occurring at our upper torso or whether it's occurring down at the lower end of our torso, where you see that now the rounding is lower down and it's at where my lower back is. So we define the two as the upper back we define as the thoracic spine and the lower back we define as the lumbar spine. So we're trying to assess whether the rounding is occurring at the thoracic or lumbar spine, because firstly at the thoracic spine it's less of an issue and less of a concern, and usually for more advanced level lifters it isn't a concern, but rather it's actually a technique that certain individuals might use, because basically how it's created, how that rounding is created is through protraction of the scapula. So when they're lengthening the arms and they're protracting the scapula and trying to keep the arms lengthened, you'll see that in this bottom position maintained throughout that, yes, my upper back is rounded and it's creating the illusion of rounding, but my lower back angle is maintained, and the stress that when we lift the barbell off the ground, that stress is always placed on the lower back and not on the upper back, so the upper back isn't in jeopardy. And also the upper back, the thoracic, is naturally kyphotic, and what that means is that it naturally follows a bit of a curve pattern. So if the rounding is occurring in the thoracic, so the upper back, that's usually not a concern to me. On the other hand, if the rounding is occurring at the lower back, so they're getting into this bottom position and they're pulling like this with the rounded lower back, or you see that during the mid-lift they've got the barbell at their shins and the lower back is rounded, then that's usually more of a concern to me, because the lower back is naturally lordotic, so it wants to bias into a bit of extension. So usually neutral or extension is usually fine in the lower back, but then if you start to force the lower back into extreme flexion ranges, so extreme bending and rounding, that means that the vertebrae in the spine is being compressed and under compressive forces due to the load of the barbell pulling it down. So if you see that this is a natural position that the body is in, the barbell is pulling the spine down and it's compressing the lower back, and the lower back is in a compressed state, then that usually presents as more concerning and more of an issue to me. Now, the second area that we need to consider when trying to analyze and assess lower back rounding, so we've established that upper T-spine rounding isn't usually an issue that I would focus on, but if that rounding occurs in the lower back, so in the lumbar region, then that's further investigation should be performed. Now, the second thing I'll look at, if it is decided that the rounding is an issue or potentially an issue and it's mostly occurring in the lower back, is the timing of the rounding. So what I mean by that is, when we look at the lumbar rounding, is the lumbar rounding occurring before the lift? So the lift is starting rounded and that position is being maintained throughout, or are they starting in a flat position and then as soon as they go to lift, their torso round, their lumbar rounds like that? And the difference between the two is, if that rounding is purposely created by the lifter before the lift to get into a more advantageous position, then usually what that means is in order to combat that, they've created a tight body, a tight core and a tight torso, and created rigidity through the legs, so that when they're creating that force is being generated through the legs, and that takes away some of the stress that's on that lumbar spine. On the other hand, if that lumbar changes position, so it starts flat, it starts in a neutral position, but then as they go to lift, then it shoots into rounding. What that means is, in this position, the force that the lifter is generating is through the lower back. The force isn't being generated through the legs, because if the force was being generated through the legs, the torso would raise as one unit. But you see that in this position, if my lower back shoots up like that, that means that, imagine it like this, they have a string tied to the lower back, and what they're thinking is they're trying to yank at the lower back, they're trying to yank the string up in order to break the ground of the barbell. So that force is being generated through pulling of that spine and compressing of that spine, rather than through the legs pushing the floor away to raise the whole torso. So My second point is, if that rounding occurs during the lift, so it's changing throughout the lift, that position, the lifter is losing their positioning and losing the flatness or neutrality of that torso, then that presents as an issue to me. So now that we've gone through number one and number two of assessing torso rounding during the deadlift, the third criteria to look at and analyze is the lifter's training history, training age, and experience, because that can play a significant role in what the athlete is able to tolerate. Because basically, the human body is very adaptable, and the human body is a lot stronger than most people give it credit for. If the lifter has done something for a certain way for an extended period of time, their body is going to adapt to that, and they're going to shift into that position. Their body is going to make adaptations. And the example I like to give to talk as a metaphor for that is, look at Olympic lifters. You know, when they're high bar squatting, snatching, Olympic lifters, they tend to bias into extension in the lower back. And for most people, most people aren't able to tolerate that extension. It will most likely cause problems. But because that's how they've always squatted and how they've always lifted throughout their career, that's their body has morphed into accepting that position, and it's most likely a very advantageous position for them. And similarly, when we're talking about rounding the deadlift, if a lifter is pulling around the lower back, but they've done so for the last 10 years without causing pain, they can lift very high absolute loads, and they can do it consistently and have done so successfully for a long period of time, then it probably isn't worth nitpicking at and changing, because that system and that biomechanical position has worked for them and hasn't created problems for them. And so that's because that's a position that they're used to and their body has accepted. And so if you were to start picking at it and you try to start shifting them away from that around the position they're in, that might actually cause more problems, because you're now trying to force a foreign movement that their body isn't accepting, and their body hasn't built a tolerance to it. So that's all for me today, guys. Hopefully that was helpful for you, and I'll catch you guys next time. Take care.